Sci-fi, horror, fantasy, absurdism in the extreme. It's all available here in the Tales from the Omni Vault book series. Check the description for Amazon links so you can get your copies and start reading today. Thank you all, and now, on to the video. It was just between daybreak and sunrise of the morning of the second day, when they were washing down the decks, that a stupid tenorific man, drawing water in the main chains, all at once shouted out, "There she rolls! There she rolls!" Jesu, what a whale! It was Moby Dick. "Moby Dick!" cried Don Sebastian. "Saint Dominic! Sir Sailor, but do whales have christenings? Whom call you Moby Dick?" "A very white and famous and most deadly immortal monster, Don. But that would be too long a story." Call me Omni Viewer, and welcome to Kaiju Lit Circle, where the pen is mightier than the maser tank. Today might be the most controversial episode of the whole set, because our subject today is considered highbrow literature in most circles. Yes, we are going to see if Moby Dick by Herman Melville is an example of a kaiju story. Moby Dick is both famous and infamous, even among avid readers. The book's fame stems from its status as the great American novel, an epic that is quintessentially American in perspective and style, drenched richly in history, themes, and iconic characters. Its infamy comes from how densely written it is, with a large chunk of the book's middle reading more like an essay on whales and whaling than a narrative about obsession and revenge. Some readers view the book as a chore, others view it as a challenge. Yes, I have read it. Fortunately, I read the abridged version as a child before I tried tackling the full version as an adult. Not that that made it much easier. But after several readings, I have come to wonder if maybe Moby Dick is a kaiju story in disguise. May as well voice the obvious question. Moby Dick is just a whale, right? So how can he be a kaiju? Oh, we'll be getting to that soon enough, Snazzy. First, though, the plot summary for completion's sake. It's the early 19th century, and a young man who wishes to be called Ishmael is feeling restless. His solution to that restlessness is to sign up as a sailor on a whaling voyage. He joins the crew of the Pequod, captained by a one-legged man named Ahab. Once aboard, though, it becomes clear that this is no ordinary voyage. Ahab tells his motley crew to be on the lookout for one whale in particular, Moby Dick, a very large, very aggressive white whale notorious for attacking ships. Ahab's grudge in particular comes from a past encounter that cost him his leg. So it is that the Pequod heads into the white whale's domain, charging headlong towards a dire fate. A classic tale, one that pretty much everybody knows, right? But do you know it as well as you think? Well, pop quiz, hotshot. What is the very first line in Moby Dick? If you think the answer is "Call me Ishmael," you're wrong. The actual first line comes from the prologue chapter Etymology, which describes an usher retrieving a book so the author can provide a definition of the word whale alongside translations of the word into different languages. The pale usher, threadbare in coat, heart, body, and brain, I see him now. He was ever dusting his old lexicons and grammars, with a queer handkerchief mockingly embellished with all the gay flags of all the known nations of the world. He loved to dust his old grammars. It somehow mildly reminded him of his mortality. After that you get extracts, a solid 12 pages worth of literary and historical quotes and references, all about whales. Well, not all of them are about whales per se, but all in due time, right, Omni? All in due time. These sections will be relevant later in the video, by the way, so don't forget about them. We brought them up now to demonstrate that there really is more to this book than a lot of people realize. As a book, Moby Dick is one of those reading experiences that I have mixed feelings about. I know it's a good story, filled with substance like few books are, but it's also a slog to get through. At 527 pages, this book is a commitment, and not even everything in here is relevant to the plot. Like I said, a goodly portion of the middle section, which is when we're actually aboard the Pequod and the whalers are plying their trade, is devoted to discussing the profession of whaling and cetology in general. Ironically, the attention to detail isn't even always accurate. Despite the scholarly elements that precede the first chapter, Ishmael insists that whales are fish rather than mammals, even rejecting claims to the contrary. Maybe it's meant to show that he's naive or ignorant, but this error doesn't really amount to much else later on. And once it's done, the poetical waxing about every single insignificant detail just keeps going. The usual argument I hear about why it's written that way is because Ishmael is suffering from PTSD. That causes him to remember literally everything about his traumatic experience, no matter how minuscule it might be. I have heard that argument, and I suppose it is a fair point. Even though post-traumatic stress disorder didn't exist as a term in Melville's time, nor was it fully understood until relatively recently, Ishmael's account does have the recognizable earmarks of the condition. It's only natural given everything he goes through. Still, though, the end result is a book that can easily alienate a lot of readers. The number of times the story drags its feet or just comes to a halt to dwell on minor details is quite large, and that might be part of the reason why the book was initially a flop. Oh yeah, this might come as a shock to some of you, but this must-read literary classic was a failure in Melville's lifetime. Copies didn't sell, American critics skewered it as if they were whalers, and the book languished as a result. For years, it wasn't regarded as anything special. The earliest silent film adaptations didn't even bother adapting it faithfully. Moby Dick didn't receive widespread recognition until the late 40s and 50s, when post-war patriotism was at an all-time high. This got scholars to look back and promote Americana as it had never been promoted before, and Melville's book got swept up in the craze. Being a book as American as apple pie and baseball, contemporary scholars gave it a second glance and determined that it deserved better treatment. So it was that Moby Dick became a classic with a capital C. Now, I'm not saying the book is undeserving, mind you. I'm just pointing out that sometimes it takes a while for great works to find their audience. Better scholars than I have analyzed Moby Dick from multiple angles, yet even the most thorough dissections are still able to miss something. The book has been viewed through many paradigms. Is it an examination of New England whaling culture? Is it a meditation on obsession and vengeance? Is it a commentary on religious views or race relations? The answer is all of the above and so much more. Make no mistake, Moby Dick is one of the most layered books you will ever read. If you have the strength to read it. Yeah, but not many people have spoken about it in the vein of Kaiju, though. Not typically, no, but I'm here to make the case that it might be an example thereof. I first had this thought during a read-through where I had music playing in the background. I find that music helps me concentrate when reading and writing. While reading one particular chapter, right as Ahab is shouting the white whale's name, Blue Oyster Cult's Godzilla started playing. It was a moment of perfect timing that made me wonder about the story ever since. Not long afterward, I watched the 1956 film adaptation with Gregory Peck, which I've been showing footage of throughout this video. And I couldn't help but notice that the white whale's portrayal was not typical of a normal animal. His behavior, the atmosphere building up to him, lines that conflate him with the divine and the demonic, all of it serves to build him up as more than just a whale. When he finally shows up on screen, he seems less like an animal and more akin to a monster, partly thanks to the special effects that wouldn't look out of place in a proper sci-fi or fantasy movie of the era. Incidentally, that screenplay was an adaptation written by Ray Bradbury, who got the job because he wrote the short story The Foghorn, which inspired The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms and Howl from Beyond the Fog, two movies about genuine giant sea monsters. Artistic depictions of the white whale also tend to either be abstract or embellished. Consider the cover of Mastodon's concept album Leviathan, which is loosely based on the book. Here, Moby Dick has the general shape of a sperm whale, but his skin has ornamentation not unlike a ship might have. Entire art galleries based on the book might show normal whales being hunted by the Pequod crew, but Moby Dick himself is set apart as something a bit more abstract. Then you have the loose adaptations that go full tilt into fantasy. The anime series Hakuge: The Legend of Moby Dick is a space opera where the whale is really a whale-shaped planet-destroying super robot.
The movie Age of the Dragons borrows the name and basic plot from the novel, but whales are replaced with dragons, as you probably guessed from hearing the title.
But you probably noticed that these are all adaptations and interpretations of the text, some of which may be intentionally exaggerating the whale for artistic purposes. What does Melville's original text say? Let's crack it open and take a look.
"Captain Ahab," said Tashtego, "that white whale must be the same that some call Moby Dick." "Moby Dick?" shouted Ahab. "Do you know the white whale then, Tash?" "Does he fantail a little curious, sir, before he goes down?" said the gay-header deliberately. "And has he a curious spout, too?" said Dagu. "Very bushy, even for a parmacetti, and mighty quick, Captain Ahab." "And he have 1, 2, 3, oh good many iron in him high too, Captain," cried Queequeg disjointedly. "All twisky-tee be twisk, like him, faltering hard for a word and screwing his hand round and round as though uncorking a bottle. "Like him... "Corkscrew!" cried Ahab. "Aye, Queequeg, the harpoons lie all twisted and wrenched in him. Aye, Dagu, his spout is a big one, like a whole shock of wheat, and white as a pile of our Nantucket wool after the great annual sheep-shearing. Aye, Tashtego, and he fantails like a split jib in a squall. Death and devils, men, it is Moby Dick ye have seen. Moby Dick. Moby Dick."
Well, that sure doesn't sound like a normal whale to me. Between his unique appearance and his above-average intelligence, it's clear that Moby Dick is distinct from other regular whales. But supposing someone says those features aren't enough to make him a kaiju, what then? Well, to do that, we must return to the beginning. Now, at this point, some of you might be thinking that the creature we call Moby Dick might have some unusual traits, but as Frank Sinatra put it, a whale is a whale is a whale. So how can I convince you that maybe he's something a little bit more? Well, you remember how we brought up the etymology and extracts portions all the way back in the beginning of the video? Let's settle there for a moment.
The etymology section does exactly what you would expect. It shows the etymology of the word whale, specifically how it's been written in different languages throughout the centuries. The first 3 examples are, in order, Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. I find this an interesting detail since these 3 languages would have in Melville's time been directly associated with both classical mythology and the Holy Bible.
That might not seem all too relevant to some of you, but then we get to the extracts. You know how some books put relevant quotes from other sources at the beginning of their books to help set the mood? Well, for Herman Melville, one quote just wasn't enough.
Like Snazzy said, we've got 12 pages here that accumulate 80 different quotes related to whales and whaling. One of these quotes relates to the sinking of the Essex by a sperm whale, a true story that everyone agrees was a direct inspiration for the book. Others, however, loop back around to mythology and religion. Most curious, though, is the inclusion of Job 41, in which the Leviathan is described. Now, Leviathan is one of 2 unusual creatures described in the Book of Job, the other being Behemoth. To this day, scholars debate what they're supposed to be. Some believe that Behemoth can be explained as an elephant or hippopotamus, though others insist that the description is more fitting of a sauropod dinosaur. Leviathan, however, is even more contested, as the description given is hard to explain as anything other than a literal dragon of the aquatic variety. "Canst thou draw out Leviathan with an hook, or his tongue with a cord which thou lettest down? Canst thou put an hook into his nose, or bore his jaw through with a thorn? Will he make many supplications unto thee? Will he speak soft words unto thee? Will he make a covenant with thee? Wilt thou take him for a servant forever? Wilt thou play with him as with a bird, or wilt thou bind him for thy maidens? Shall the companions make a banquet of him? Shall they part him among the merchants? Canst thou fill his skin with barbed irons, or his head with fish spears? Lay thine hand upon him, remember the battle, do no more. Behold, the hope of him is in vain. Shall not one be cast down, even at the sight of him? None is so fierce that dare stir him up. Who then is able to stand before me? Who hath prevented me that I should repay him? Whatsoever is under the whole heaven is mine. I will not conceal his parts, nor his power, nor his comely proportion. Who can discover the face of his garment? Or who can come to him with his double bridle? Who can open the doors of his face? His teeth are terrible round about. His scales are his pride, shut up together as with a close seal. One is so near to another that no air can come between them. They are joined one to another, they stick together, they cannot be sundered. By his neesings a light doth shine, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth go burning lamps, and sparks of fire leap out. Out of his nostrils goeth smoke, as out of a seething pot or cauldron. His breath kindleth coals, and a flame goeth out of his mouth. In his neck remaineth strength, and sorrow is turned into joy before him. The flakes of his flesh are joined together, they are firm in themselves, they cannot be moved. His heart is as firm as a stone, yea, as hard as a piece of the nether millstone. When he raiseth himself up, the mighty are afraid. By reason of breakings they purify themselves. The sword of him that layeth at him cannot hold, the spear, the dart, nor the habergeon. He esteemeth iron as straw, and brass as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make him flee. Slingstones are turned with him into stubble. Darts are counted as stubble. He laugheth at the shaking of a spear. Sharp stones are under him. He spreadeth sharp-pointed things upon the mire. He maketh the deep to boil like a pot. He maketh the sea like a pot of ointment. He maketh a path to shine after him. One would think the deep be a hoary. Upon earth there is not his like who is made without fear. He beholdeth all high things. He is a king over all the children of pride.
Now, don't you think it's interesting that this quote about a biblical sea monster is included amongst all these other quotes about whales? And it's not the only one. There are other similar quotes peppered throughout the extracts.
This means that if you don't skip over these sections and actually read them, you're going into the story having been subtly nudged towards conflating the idea of whale with the ideas of mythology, divinity, and monster.
Those concepts are certainly familiar to us Kaiju fans, and they can all be found in the creature we call Moby Dick. So having gotten to this point, I think it's prudent to finally ask, what was the point of this video? Well, I suppose I did it to build a bridge.
Moby Dick is considered one of the greatest works ever written, largely because it has everything. It's got drama, comedy, adventure, horror, educational value, social commentary, and a boatload of themes. It became a nexus for multiple literary legacies, and then became the genesis for a legacy of its own.
By making this video, I wanted to show that the kaiju genre is part of that legacy. Whether you're an intellectual, a fun lover, a stuffed shirt, or a fanboy, maybe this has gotten you to expand your thinking a little bit, and look at both the original text by Herman Melville and the various movies from all across cinematic history in a slightly different way. Or maybe I've just been spurting nonsense out of my blowhole this whole time. I suppose we'll find out. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni viewer casting off. Hang on a moment. You never even once mentioned Queequeg. I didn't? Huh. Well, thinking back, there was really no place that was natural to talk about him. That's the way it goes sometimes.